Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to my latest episode of New Album Spotlight. This is the show where I put the spotlight on a new progressive rock album that I've been enjoying, that I think you guys would like and that I'm recommending to you, giving my quick thoughts about it and what I believe it sounds like, to give you guys an impression if it's worth checking out from your perspective. And so it's a lot of fun, and it's a great way for me to share new music with my audience, who I think have really been appreciative of this content, and I really like sharing. So what we have today is eMolecule and the album The Architect. This is a new band, so this is a new project, and it's one coming out on Inside Out this upcoming Friday, so I wanted to get a chance to talk about it and talk about my feelings and impressions about this great upcoming album that I strongly recommend to all of you prog fans out there. So this is a project from former Sound of Contact members Simon Collins and Kelly Nordstrom. Sound of Contact was a band that came out in, I believe their album debut record, Dimensionaut, which is behind me on the wall, came out in 2013, so 10 years ago almost. That album came out. That album made a pretty big splash in the prog scene at the time and was heralded as one of the great new releases. But unfortunately, the band disbanded after that. It seems like there was possibly some infighting between the band, or some bad blood there, or something didn't go quite right. I shouldn't delve into the specifics, but unfortunately the band was unable to continue in that form. But it seems like Simon Collins has since done a lot of solo work since then and has really focused a lot on his musical career. But this project is bringing back on board Kelly Nordstrom, the duo that basically were behind the composition of Dimensionaut, and brings them into the fold in a new way, a new creative project, a big concept album called The Architect. And this is a really cool, interesting, modern sounding prog album. It really takes a lot of cues from some of the more modern progressive artists like Frost, like Tool perhaps. You know, it has that bit of a fresh, heavier vibe that a lot of those bands tend to have, with little bits of electronic influences as well in the mix, and rooted in this more heavy, dark, progressive spirit. I also think of Pure Reason Revolution, and their recent albums have a lot of the same spirit about it too, but they're also really good about infusing a lot of really strong melodies and some really great choruses. It almost has a pop sensibility in the hook writing and in the ability they have to really give you this kind of earworm that catches your ear and that is memorable even after you've heard the album. So I think it's a really good balance. And there are some more lighter, poppier moments as well, especially in the second half of the record. So it's not just an onslaught of heaviness, but I think especially at the opening, you really get a sense that this is a darker, moodier album than what they've done in the past, especially on Dimensionaut, which is my main point of reference. That album was more rooted in neo-prog and in a more lighter sensibility with maybe some symphonic prog influences, a little bit of a heavier edge in that one as well, but I think it wore more of its prog influences on its sleeve and was more of a traditional prog album, whereas this album is more darker and heavier and really embraces a more modern aesthetic and sound. So, but I really like that. I think it really brings a freshness to the music and makes it stand out in the modern landscape. You know, sometimes some of these more retro prog acts they're all deriving from a lot of the same sources, so it can sound a little bit samey or can sound a bit derivative to the classic sounds. So it's cool to see a band come about with a little bit of a fresh perspective that's a little bit separated from some of that you hear in the modern prog genre. So I really enjoyed this record. I do find the album to probably be a bit overlong. It's a really long album that's I believe 75 minutes or so. It really stretches the length of like a CD, and it sounds like they even had material to stretch further than that. They had enough for almost a double album, so it seems like they already cultivated to a single disc album. But I do still think that it's a sprawling project, and it takes a lot of time to really dial into it and to really get into all of the pieces that are there to really make sense of it all. At least it did for me, because on the first couple listens, I was a little bit underwhelmed. I was a little bit like, you know, I feel like this is the type of music that should really be speaking to me and that I should be really enjoying, but for some reason isn't really grabbing hold quite yet. But as I kept going, kept listening, the secrets underneath were really uncovering themselves, and those hidden depths were really opening to me, and I really was enjoying it more and more. And now it's become one of my favorites that I've been listening to this year. So really an interesting album with an interesting concept. You know, I've tried to delve into the lyrics a little bit. The most that I can derive from it, and I'm sure you can interpret them your own way, is that it's basically about a character who is somewhat of a bitter and hateful person, maybe a dictator of sorts, someone in a position of power, it seems, someone who vaults themselves up very highly, but somehow receives some kind of terminal diagnosis, is dying, perhaps, is coming to new realizations in his moment of death that maybe he didn't make some of the best choices, and trying to turn that around and find a way to make a bright, hopeful impression before he finally leaves this life. So there was some of that overtones to me, and I think that is in the aesthetic of the album, which is basically separated into these two parts. The first half of the album is a lot heavier, a lot darker, a lot moodier, really representing the state of mind of this individual and their more darker tendencies in the first half of the album. But then there's a track literally called The Turn, which really turns this story around and really brings in the more hopeful aspects. And this is where you hear more of the brighter, more poppier moments of the album, the more catchy choruses and some of the more uplifting sections, as this main character is starting to come to more of a realization of, you know, what he's really living for and what is really meaningful in life, and trying to change his life around essentially before passing. So it's a really, really great structure for the album that I thought was really, really a cool, clever touch. It starts off with the track eMolecule, which is, you know, it's fun when a band does a track that's based on the name of the band. So it's a really epic piece. This is a really good one to check out if you want an idea of what you might have in store here. It's a really slow build up, some almost Floydian atmosphere and a psychedelic side to it, but interspersed with some of those heavier, more metallic, Tool-like elements as well. Really repeated lyrics, almost chant-like in their feel, come aboard here, and there's just a lot of atmospheric ambiance and some really great guitar playing, almost Floydian or Dave Gilmour style. So it's a really cool extended track that really gets you into the mood of the album in a very big, slow build, burning kind of way. This leads into The Architect, which is one of the heavier tracks of the album, just a really heavy rocking track. Sounds almost like Rush to me, especially modern Rush. Really, really cool sound, really great focus on guitars and bass and some really heavy stuff going on. Halfway through it does slow down a bit with some acoustic guitars and atmospheric keys, some spoken words, but we really keep in that heavier vein. Prison Planet is a really interesting track as well. Begins a bit softer with some atmosphere and prominent keys before the vocals in, and it gets more dark and haunting with some programmed drums. Has this cool modern alternative vibe and some electronic flourishes in the mix. This was a really cool track to check out. Some cool dramatic keys present on that track. Mastermind is another highlight of the album. Almost some twisted carnival sounding keys enter with some darker atmospheres. Cool haunting vibe with some really angry, aggressive lyrics. We get a cool breakdown in the middle. It's short and subtle, but there's this almost like 60s rock with a bright guitar feel in this really brief middle section before we get back into this more heaviness and darker atmosphere that builds and builds into this really cool dark flavor. Dosed is more of like an alternative, grungy type track, really heavy, really cool rock song as well. Like I said, The Turn is where things get it's more of an instrumental with some piano and haunting atmosphere before it builds with some cool guitar licks. You get some electronic types of cracks and fizzles with some angry spoken vocals before we get into Awaken, which is one of the more uplifting, poppier tracks on the record. Some really heartfelt vocals, a really catchy chorus. This is a really uplifting, fun song that I really enjoyed. Beyond Belief is more of a cool 80s pop type of song as well, with a catchy chorus. Fun and rocking and an addictive track. Universal is another heavy track. I like the catchy keyboard riff that repeats throughout the track as well. My You is another melodic track with a great keyboard riff that drives it, with a more pop-centric feel as well, and a great harder driving bridge. Really great balanced song that's really, really great. And Moment of Truth is the ending to it. Another more soulful ballad starts this one with some delightful guitar lines, but we move into a heavier direction as this ends, and ends actually the last minute and a half or so is like one of the heaviest sections of the entire album to leave you on this like heavier, darker note. So a really cool album with a lot of variety, a lot of different sounds. It has a lot of that heaviness and darkness, but it also has some lighter ballads and some poppier elements and some more catchy choruses and earworms that are really enjoyable as well. So a really interesting effort from the group. Maybe, like I said, could utilize a little bit of trimming as my main criticism. I felt like, you know, it was a lot to get through and a lot for me to grab hold of as I listened. It was almost overwhelming at first, but as I kept listening, the hooks really continued to grab me, and the album came into better focus and became a really awesome listen that I really recommend to you guys out there. So hopefully you enjoyed this review and it gave you a good sense of what you can expect from the album, and I would encourage you to go check it out everywhere this Friday. Should be a fun release to look forward to and to enjoy from these really talented musicians. A really expansive project, and hopefully it means more music from them in the future. So really excited about that too. So thank you guys once again, and I will hopefully catch you in another video. And for now, just enjoy the music. Bye!